Next, let's talk about what we're actually going to do after we come up with this H1 and H naught, our null and alternative hypothesis. So let's talk about this. So the first thing that we do is we come up with our claim. Then we come up with our H naught and our H1. Okay, then what happens? Well, no matter what symbols we have, we're going to test. We're always going to be testing the null hypothesis. So we're always going to test, no matter which one's the claim, we're always testing the null hypothesis. And there's two options when we're testing. Once we've done our test, there are two options for the test. So we'll do our test, and then there'll be two options. Either we'll fail to reject H naught, or we'll actually reject H naught. Okay, so let's talk about the wording here because it's super important. Failing to reject H naught does not mean you're actually accepting. Failing means you're not doing anything. You're failing to do anything. So this, failing to reject H naught, actually means that your test was inconclusive. You tested H naught and you didn't find out one way or the other what anything meant. So you failed to reject H naught. However, if you, instead of failing to reject, if you actually reject H naught, that means you found out that H naught, whatever it was you were claiming in H naught, is not true. Now, we do need to be a little bit careful as to what's going on with H1 because sometimes H naught is our claim and sometimes H1 is our claim. So let's talk about this. So here we've got an example. If we've got an H naught and an H1, suppose we fail to reject H naught. So I'm going to write a little fail to reject because we said that was a possibility, H naught. Then the question is, what does that mean about H1 down below it? Well, it still means your test is still inconclusive, but you're just going to do something slightly different. You're going to fail to do the opposite. So instead of failing to reject, you're going to do the opposite. You're going to fail to accept H1. And the reason why we need to know this is because sometimes our claim will be on our H naught and sometimes it'll be on our H1. So we know that we need to know whether or not we're failing to reject or failing to accept. Remember that the failing to, though, is always going to mean that your test is basically inconclusive. There was not enough evidence to do anything, to either accept or reject, depending on where you're falling. To either reject or accept. However, what if we have an H naught and an H1, and instead of failing to reject H naught, what if we actually do reject H naught? If we reject H naught, that means for H1, again, we're going to do the reverse. Instead of rejecting, because they're complements, we'll accept H1. Notice, this means that the only time we can actually use the word accept is if it is attached to the H1. We will only always use the word reject or fail to reject with H naught and fail to accept or accept on H1. Now, what does this mean? This means your test was not inconclusive. It means you actually did something. So you had enough evidence to either reject or accept your claim, and it just depends on whether or not your claim was the H0 or the H1 as to whether or not you're going to choose the reject or the accept. So we're going to do hypothesis testing problems. We already understand how to set up our problems by identifying the claim and doing our H0, our null hypothesis, and our alternative hypothesis. What we don't know is how to actually do the testing. This is going to be a little long-winded, but we're going to, again, have our calculator doing the heavy lifting for us. It's going to make a big difference.